reality.
They turned off like a light switch, and there was nothing.
It's a mystery scientists are working hard to solve.
I didn't know who I was, where I was. I don't remember doing things.
No one knows how many people have COVID-19 induced brain injuries.
The virus might impact their activities of daily living. So this is a healthcare issue and a societal issue.
On the night of April 18th, Portapique was changed forever.
I can't sleep here, can't shut my eyes.
Nearly 8 months later, families and entire communities are struggling to move forward.
It was easier when there was so much adrenaline, and now it's sinking in.
We can't go back. That doesn't exist anymore. So we will shape a new identity.
Hello, I'm Dawna Friesen. We have a more refined understanding of the coronavirus now than at the start of the pandemic. It has infiltrated all our lives, and a dangerous fiction has spread that it's really only a risk to the elderly and those with severe chronic illness, and that it's a respiratory disease. That is simply not true. There is no ironclad protection for anyone, and every major organ can be invaded and infected. That includes our most complex and vital organ, the brain. And scientists believe if we don't figure out why, it could create a ripple effect of symptoms that last a lifetime.
I couldn't think. Suddenly, I couldn't hold on to any thoughts. And I didn't know who I was, where I was, and I don't know how long I was like that. I just remember coming out of it and still feeling really, really confused.
They were not the symptoms Erica Taylor was expecting. When she got COVID-19, she was a 31-year-old, fit, active young lawyer. It started with a dry cough and nausea, and then it moved to her brain. Taylor's story starts in mid-June in Atlanta, Georgia.
I honestly didn't think that I had COVID, but I got tested as a precaution because I knew that I was planning to go to the courthouse the next week.
2 days later, the results came back positive.
I remember being completely floored. I think the first thing that I said was actually an expletive. I tried to work, and I got so tired and so confused trying to stare at my computer screen. I fully expected that within a day or so I would start to feel better, but that didn't happen.
Over a period of 6 weeks, there were headaches, then memory loss, and serious bouts of confusion.
I forget things that I just did. I don't remember doing things. I forget words. I don't remember grammar all the time.
It's called brain fog, a gentle term to describe a series of symptoms that can include dizziness, trouble focusing, and grasping everyday words. When the coronavirus infects the brain, it can cause inflammation, it can cause strokes, and autopsies have found virus particles in the brains of some people who died from COVID-19. In November, researchers found nearly 10 to 35% of COVID-19 survivors in the U.S. experienced disabling and persistent neurological symptoms. It's a mystery scientists, including here in Canada, are working hard to solve. Simon Graham at the Sunnybrook Research Institute in Toronto is leading a team studying how COVID impacts the brain.
What is your concern in the years ahead for people who perhaps have recovered from the worst of the symptoms?
The virus might impact the brain in certain people, impairing their activities of daily living, potentially stopping them from being gainfully employed. And so this is a healthcare issue and a societal issue.
They're recruiting former COVID-19 patients, some with lingering symptoms, and doing MRIs. But how does the virus get into the brain in the first place? One theory is tied to that telltale symptom, loss of sense of smell. The virus can get into the body through the nasal cavity, and from there, it might be able to migrate up into different parts of the brain, including the orbitofrontal cortex.
Interestingly, the brain is covered with a membrane called the dura, and the orbitofrontal cortex actually doesn't have any dura. It's the only part of the brain that has this potential pathway. And so the virus can get in there And then in animals, at least, it's migrated down into areas kind of lower in the brain that are responsible for controlling respiration and the heartbeat.
So that is more of a sort of top down, right? The brain getting hit first and then it moving down through other organs.
That's right. And so there are examples of people who have only had neurological symptoms and not respiratory symptoms.
Hi, my name is Tracy Thompson, and I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I'm making this video to put out in the world in case I don't make it through this. If I do, please.
Tracy Thompson fears COVID will kill her. The 52-year-old says her first symptoms were sore throat, fatigue, and then sudden loss of smell and taste.
I'm eating food, and from one bite to the next, that's the senses just turned off, right? They turned off like a light switch, and there was nothing, like a complete absence, no salt, no sweet, no nothing, just texture.
More than 8 months later, Thompson is still barely getting by. Her short-term memory is non-existent.
Like running a bath is a treacherous thing to do now because I have to sit there and watch it because I don't know if I leave the room, if I'm going to remember that that's what I was doing.
Now she has to set multiple alarms as reminders to carry out everyday tasks.
I was extremely healthy before this. You know, I worked in a kitchen. I was a chef. I worked the line. I can rock and roll with the best of them. You know, if this is a permanent state for me, I'm going to have to figure out a new way to be in the world. My wall of Post-it notes can't travel with me, so.
No one knows how many people have COVID-19 induced brain injuries. In Canada, there aren't many requirements to track these type of symptoms. Teresa Lou Ambrose is the director of the Aging, Mobility and Cognitive Neuroscience Laboratory at the University of British Columbia.
A lot of the damages that we see within the brain takes years to accrue. With COVID-19, the emerging evidence is that it's quite rapid in terms of its effects.
A recent study published in Neurology showed out of 160 stroke patients with COVID-19, 50% of cases involving younger patients didn't have a cough or trouble breathing as the first symptoms. They had a stroke. Lou Ambrose's team is part of the Canadian longitudinal study on aging COVID-19 brain health, which plans to track participants until 2033. Using neuroimaging, they hope to study the brains of about 1,000 people, some with the virus and some without.
So the impact of COVID-19 on the brain could be thought of as accelerating brain aging. So when we age, one of the common things that happens within our brain is that the blood vessels do become compromised.
Evidence suggests COVID-19 impacts the same blood vessels that feed the brain. If the virus is damaging those vessels, which speeds up aging, it means some survivors might be at risk of developing early onset dementia.
With COVID-19, what we're seeing is that it seems quite rapid that you would actually see these neuroimaging markers in those who were acutely infected. And I can't think of another condition where we've seen that previously.
My legs, God, they really hurt. And I feel dizzy.
As for Erica Taylor, she hasn't gone back to work yet. She's on medical leave and spends her days going from appointment to appointment, trying to get to the bottom of her brain fog.
I've gotten a little bit better as I've gone with my neurological symptoms, with being able to think and remember, but I'm still struggling a lot. And, you know, to be a lawyer means to use your brain. And I don't know if I'll ever get to the point where I'll be the same. I fear that a lot.
Coming up on The New Reality.
It was one of the worst mass killing sprees in Canadian history.
I lost my friends. I woke up to a horror show. I'll never get over it.
Nearly 8 months later, communities are struggling to move forward.
We can't go back to before April 18th. That doesn't exist anymore. We're trying to figure out who are we now?
Welcome back. For 13 hours, a shooting rampage terrified a community in Nova Scotia. When it was over, 22 people were dead. That was almost 8 months ago. The people of Portapique are still traumatized. Some are contemplating moving to get away from the horrific memories that haunt them. Ross Lord returned to the once peaceful community to see if healing is even possible.
The tiny community of Portapique is a natural haven. Located on the beautiful Nova Scotia coastline, it's a place to relax and get away from it all. A place where people know their neighbors. It's now also a place some people want to leave, to escape the trauma inflicted on them by one of those very same neighbors.
I lost my friends. I woke up to a horror show. I'll never get over it.
So there's a structure fire. There's a person down there with a gun. They're still looking for him.
On the night of April 18th, Portapique was changed forever. For 13 hours, a gunman named Gabriel Wortman went on a rampage, leaving a trail of burnt wreckage and bodies in Portapique and beyond. When it was over, he had murdered 22 people. It was one of the worst mass killing sprees in Canadian history, and it all started here.
I fell asleep, and just before I was dozing off, I heard like a pop, sound like a shotgun or gunshot. I didn't know what it sounded like, so I just fell asleep.
Leon Jodry woke up at 4 a.m. to scenes of unimaginable horror. He, like many, is having trouble coping with the memories of that night.
Never will make sense to me. It's just unbelievable what happened, but it happened.
Police say it began with an argument that turned violent between Wortman and his common-law partner, Lisa Banfield. Then, Wortman set 2 of his own properties on fire and went on the hunt. Greg and Jamie Blair were among Wortman's first victims.
We can fall in love in mysterious ways.
Greg's son, Tyler, thinks he knows why his father was targeted.
I can only think because he knew there was a big hunter, he had lots of rifles, and that could have threw a stick into his whole plan.
It's believed Wortman killed the Blairs around 10 p.m. while their 2 younger sons hid in the house. When they realized Wortman was trying to set the house on fire, the boys escaped, running to the nearby house of Lisa McCulley. McCulley was a beloved elementary school teacher and a single parent of 2.
I know you belong to somebody new.
She was just so dynamic and involved and passionate and protective and constantly coming up with new and creative ideas.
McCulley noticed massive flames coming from Wortman's place across the road. She called 911. She saw what looked like a police car and a man dressed like an RCMP officer. It was Wortman. He shot and killed her. After Wortman left, the Blair boys arrived from next door. Together with McCulley's 2 kids, they hid in the basement. The children talked with the 911 dispatcher for 2 hours, waiting for help to arrive. Earlier on that Saturday evening, Lisa walked along the beach with a glass of wine. She sent her sister, Jenny, a picture. After Lisa's death, Jenny posted a matching image in tribute. But at times, the pain of loss is almost unbearable.
There are moments when it's just really intense.
The Blair and McCulley kids survived, but 13 other people in Portapique died that night. It's possible none of them could have been saved. But the rampage didn't end there. Among the many unanswered questions is how the gunman escaped from Portapique to continue the massacre. Despite police claims there were more than 24 officers on the scene very quickly.
It's very vague what's going on down there, but there is for sure multiple patients down there.
On the night of April 18th, RCMP arrived in Portapique shortly before 10:30 p.m. Global News has learned Wortman was in the area until at least 10:45, nearly 20 minutes later. So how was he able to escape and kill 9 more people over the next 12 hours? The Mounties had blocked off the main road in and out of Portapique, but they left this dirt road unattended. They say it's likely Wortman used that road to get past police and connect with the highway, which they'd left open.
That's how you get out, and there's only one way out of here other than the way of the entrance, so that's why it's important.
In addition to his knowledge of the back roads, Wortman had another big advantage. He'd spent a lot of time and money collecting RCMP memorabilia. He had uniforms and several former police cruisers, and one had all the markings of the real thing. Once he escaped Portapique, he used his disguise to continue the killing spree.
He didn't hide that fact that he had cars or memorabilia from people that knew him.
In fact, Wortman had a fully marked replica cruiser on display at his warehouse in Portapique, shown in this photo obtained by Global News. It was taken in November, 5 months before the rampage. As Wortman's killing spree was unfolding, a witness in Portapique told police the gunman was driving what looked like an RCMP car. They believed he had 3 such cars and quickly accounted for them. What they didn't know is there was a 4th vehicle, the same one that had been sitting in his warehouse for months.
They assumed he committed suicide and was in the community. By assuming that, allowed him to kill people outside Portapique. No, it was just inexcusable.
For hours, the public got no information, other than one vague tweet about a firearms complaint around 11:30 p.m. People had no warning that Wortman was driving a replica cruiser and wearing an RCMP uniform until after 10 a.m. the following morning, more than 10 hours later. Years earlier, there were multiple complaints about Wortman, that he talked about killing cops, that he physically abused his girlfriend, that he had illegal weapons. The complaints went nowhere. The RCMP's failures, before, during, and after the massacre, have shaken people's trust. Criminologist Daryl Davies says RCMP clearly have not learned from previous deadly shooting rampages like Moncton, New Brunswick in 2014.
Portapique is more of a, I would say, a gross exaggeration of the organization's inability to be able to handle that type of situation.
Witnesses have told police Wortman had become increasingly agitated about the pandemic. Davies says RCMP should have been better prepared.
In light of the lockdown and the pandemic and everything, the possibility that it would trigger something like this in somebody who was mentally unstable was a very high probability.
They got the killer right here.
When the onslaught finally ended, it was by chance. An RCMP officer who stopped for fuel at this gas station encountered Wortman, who had stolen a car from one of his victims and needed gas. The officer shot and killed the gunman at 11:26 a.m. on April 19th, 13 hours after the massacre started. In all, he killed 22 people at 16 crime scenes, including RCMP veteran Constable Heidi Stevenson, a mother of 2 children. Nearly 8 months later, families and entire communities are struggling to move forward.
We're trying to figure out who are we now?
Serena Lewis is Nova Scotia's grief coordinator. She lives near Portapique. Her own family was locked down during the massacre.
We can't go back to before April 18th. That doesn't exist anymore. So we will shape a new identity. Some people globally have told me this could be a 20-year span for these communities. That's if we lean in.
Lewis says grief counseling is already under-resourced in Nova Scotia, and healing is even harder during the pandemic when physical contact is discouraged. Now, common things can be emotional triggers, even the mere sight of an RCMP vehicle.
If you see a car coming with the lights on behind you, what does that do for people? I was in a gathering the other day, and I had to stop everybody because I could feel it. And I said, kind of how's everybody doing here tonight, given the fact that we've had the largest mass shooting in Canada? And a woman looked at me and she said, are we really allowed to talk about that elephant?
For families, pursuing answers has led to more pain. On December 4th, the RCMP did announce it was charging Wortman's common-law partner, Lisa Banfield, and 2 others with illegally transferring ammunition to the gunman. RCMP claimed the 3 had no prior knowledge of Wortman's actions on April 18th and 19th. But many other questions remain. Grief-stricken families had to protest before the federal and Nova Scotia governments agreed to a full public inquiry. They'll have to wait 2 years for the inquiry's final report.
I'll sing for you because I need to.
The massacre has drawn condolences from across the country, but the outpouring only goes so far. Victims' relatives, like Jenny Kierstead, are struggling to cope with their grief.
It was easier when there was so much adrenaline, and now it's sinking in.
Before his dad was killed, Tyler Blair and his partner had a baby daughter. He remembers how happy his dad was when he found out he'd be a grandfather.
I told my dad on our way to work one morning. His face just lit up. He was super excited. He was more excited than I was, I think.
She will only know her grandparents from pictures.
I'll make sure she knows how much they loved her.
Some residents are literally moving on. Portapique is dotted with for sale signs. Leon Jodry has not slept in his house since that horrific night. He's decided to leave, hoping that will finally bring him peace.
I can't sleep here, can't shut my eyes, so it's my choice not to stay here. I'm selling mine. I can't speak for anybody else. I'm selling mine for the images I got in my head of driving around that night. I drive here and it's all I see.
Next week on The New Reality.
Things have really accelerated with Wave 2, and it's disheartening. There's no other way to put it. Our staff are fatigued.
So half the ICU right now is COVID. They're all on life support in one way or the other. But we're seeing outbreaks in families, and we're seeing that when family members are visiting other family members and putting those people at risk.
How worried are you about going into Christmas and what might be waiting for us on the other side of that?
Very. Like unequivocally, very.
That is The New Reality for this week. I'm Dawna Friesen. Thanks for watching.